All right, it is recording. So here is the syllabus. We have a pretty full day, though I do believe that most of this stuff will be you guys working on activities. There's basically 3 activities that we're going to start and get kind of finished today. But here's today. I'm going to lecture a little bit on APA formatting, which should be reviewed because you guys all should have had that in the research methods. You're going to do some lab 2 prep by yourselves. You're going to answer an in-class discussion group question about the article that you read for today. And I've decided to add one thing to the lecture about attention from last time. So we were talking about attention, and I added one thing to those slides. So I have updated the attention slides. These slides that I posted for last class, I added one additional slide on Blackboard. So you might want to take that. It's updated. Take a look at that. I'm going to talk about that one additional slide. So I'm going to lecture on that one slide, and then talk about APA formatting for a few minutes, and then you're basically going to have 3 activities today. I'll give you a sneak peek of what those activities are. These are the activities. I have one additional component to the activity that you started last time related to Lab 1. Last time you calculated within subjects T using Excel. Today you are going to do a little bit more compilation of reaction times. You're going to calculate in particular something called correct reaction times. It's just a small little change to what we had done previously. It's one additional step, so that should not be particularly tricky for you. And then those will be the things you turn in for Lab 1 Part 2. I have a single question for you guys to talk about regarding the Spatial EF1 article that you read for today, and you should have taken the Blackboard quiz. And then Lab 2 prep will involve you watching some videos that have been posted by the creator of psy-toolkit, who's a professor over in Great Britain, and he's pretty famous, actually. So you'll be watching some videos that he made about psy-toolkit to kind of teach you how to use it. The reason that is important is because for this Friday's lab, this is going to be one of the labs which is different than the others, and that we're not going to be collecting data from ourselves as participants on Friday. We're going to be spending lab time on Friday for you guys to actually start programming an experiment, coding an experiment in psy-toolkit. You will be coding a Stroop task, I believe is what is planned. So I will show you either through a YouTube video, which I'll post a link for, or I'll show you live in class in the lab Friday, how to start programming things in psy-toolkit. That's the main thing that we'll be doing. And so you're going to start learning about how to code in psy-toolkit today, and then I'll teach you more regarding the lab Friday. And so you'll answer some questions about those videos. So those are 3 things. This is like 6 points right here that you'll be getting, basically completion grades, as long as you're doing the work in a reasonable way. And that will be the majority of the class should be spent working on those things. But before we get to that, I do want to talk briefly about this thing that I added to the lecture about attention. So the last slide that we talked about regarding, maybe we should actually make sure we remember the definition of attention. Yeah, here's the definition of controlled attention from the Spatial EF article that you read for today. And I started talking about this definition last time. The capacity for performing controlled processing or sustaining focus on task-relevant information, such as a goal, in the face of interfering or distracting information, or distracting stimuli, or a distracting task. So we were talking about that, and we were talking about the Stroop task. And in the Stroop task, the goal is to say the color of the ink. And the distracting stimuli, or the distracting task, is the tendency to want to read what the word says. So this is the last slide that we talked about when we were dealing with the attention lecture last time. So the thing that I've added is this right here, complex span task. These are mentioned in the article that you read for today, the Spatial EF1 article that you read for today. Complex span tasks like these are mentioned. And the article basically makes the claim that these are measures of working memory. And I have a lot of stuff in the notes here to kind of help you better understand these, but I'll talk a little bit about them right now. So the idea of these complex span tasks that's emphasized in the article, the SF, the spatial FEF1 article that you read for today, is that they're more complex than simple digit span tasks or simple short-term memory tasks. So in a simple digit span task, what happens is you are read a sequence of numbers, like 8 numbers, like 2, 3, 9, 7, 4, 1, 6, 8. I don't know how many numbers that was, but it's a sequence of numbers. Somewhere between 5 to 9 numbers are in the sequence. And your job as the participant is just to remember all of the numbers in the sequence. So the thing about the digit span task is just a basic measure of short-term memory is it's not complex. The reason it's not complex is because there's nothing that you're having to ignore. There's no interfering component. You're given the things that you are given, all those numbers. Your job is just to remember all of those numbers, and that's it. In the complex span tasks, on the other hand, there's always a primary task, but then there's always something else that you're simultaneously doing, which is meant to kind of interfere or be a little bit distracting. And there's 2 different examples of complex span tasks here. The reading span, what you do, and you can kind of see the sequence of stimuli in a reading span task, and kind of it describes it here. You'll see this sequence of sentences, and your job, the main job that you have is to remember these bold words right here. So what would happen, the way this trial would start, this whole thing is one trial. It would start, and my job as the participant is to read off all of the words that appear on the computer screen. This is like one computer screen. So I would say, I wish there was someone to whom I could say that I felt sorry, death. And then my job would be to remember the word death. And then I would go to the next computer screen where I do the same thing. Fortunately, the elderly man had at long last met a kind-hearted woman, free. Then my job is to remember the word free. And I want to remind you though, that currently I'm also storing in my mind, the word death as well. So I have the word death up there and the word free in there, and I'm trying to now remember those 2 things. The primary task is remembering what those bold words are. The secondary task, the task who isn't not really important, is just when I read the sentences. The researchers don't care if I remember the sentences. They just tell you, read those sentences. But what you're really trying to do is remember those bold-faced words. The next one right here, crying, Jane went to the hospital with a broken leg. And then the bold word that I would remember would be, whoa. And then right here, it says blank screen presented, and the participant's job is to recite as many of those bold words as possible. So in the reading span task, the primary task, the goal, is to remember as many of the bold-faced words as possible. The distractor task, the thing which is interfering, is reading those sentences aloud. The sentences are kind of irrelevant. There's something the researchers make you do just kind of to distract you. And so you're using your attention to kind of maintain in your short-term memory the representations of those bold-faced words, while your attention is focusing on those words, but kind of ignoring or inhibiting the irrelevant distractors, the reading of the sentences. Here is a different one, which uses numbers. This is called the operation span task. It's also a complex span task, and similar type of task. You see this number 26, and you try and remember that. And then that's your primary goal, is to remember the numbers that you see, like 26 and 14. The numbers that you see by themselves, you try and remember those. That is the primary task. The intervening task, or the task which is meant to interfere with that ability, is you see slides like this. This one says 6 plus 7 equals 10. And your job as the participant is to indicate whether that's true or false, just to make sure everyone's with me. Is that true or false?
False.
Yes, 6 plus 7 equals 13, so that would be false. That's kind of the distractor part. The researchers assume that that's trivially easy for you, but the idea is that your ability to remember these numbers, like 26 and 14, that's going to be a little bit harder, because in between each of these numbers, which you have to encode into your short-term memory and store there and remember them, in between that you have this interfering task, which is evaluating this equation for whether it is true or false. So the goal task is remembering all these numbers, storing these numbers, and then remember them. At the end of the trial, at the end of the sequence of of things that you'll see. The researcher will say, okay, remember all those numbers that we told you to store, recite them for us. And they don't actually care about your performance in evaluating whether the equations are true or false. The secondary task is evaluating whether those equations are true or false. That's what's meant to interfere. So you're using your attention here in the operation span task to maintain in your mind those representations of those numbers, 26, 14, and the other numbers you might be asked to represent, while you're inhibiting or you're kind of ignoring the equations that you also had to evaluate whether they were true or false. So complex span tasks always have a primary task and a secondary task. And the secondary task kind of interferes with what, at least in theory, it's supposed to interfere with the primary task. And this is what is discussed in the spatial EF, the spatial executive function 1 article that you read for today. And I wrote some things about it down here. And one thing I wanted to draw attention is that the reason why these tasks matter is because, well, for 70 years or so, the digit span, the simple digit span task, where I give you a sequence of numbers and you recite it back to me, that's been around for like 70 years. And it's kind of been the standard measure of short-term memory. But recent research over the past, I'd say, 20 years has supported this idea that complex span tasks better predict performance on other cognitive tasks than simple digit span tasks. So complex span tasks are kind of better predictors of things like intelligence than simple span tasks. And so these are more important, they're more powerful than digit span. And they're also theoretically important to the article that you read for today. So that's it. Any questions then about anything that we've talked about in this attention chapter? Okay. Now I will talk in a little bit more detail about the assignments some of the assignments that you're going to have for today. But then I will be lecturing a little bit more, and then I'll let you loose to do all this stuff. So the first part is so you've already started Lab 1, Part 2. You've already calculated the within subjects T in Excel. The way you're going to complete Lab 1, Part 2 is you are going to add an additional sheet, and you are going to do use formulas, and I'll show you this, to compile raw reaction times, and correct react. You've actually already compiled raw reaction times, but you're also going to add correct reaction times as well. And you're going to use my data. So I have given you on Blackboard data. Let's see, where is it? It's going to be labs. And then if you go right here, where it says Lab 1, Part 2, it says Lab 1, Part 2, correct RT for students. I guess I can open that up, why not? And then this contains my data right there. And so that's what you're going to use. But I'm going to show you on one that I've already opened and already completed it, what you're going to be doing. I'm basically going to be giving you the answers. You just have to duplicate it yourself using equations. So, erase this one. So here is what you did last time. I gave you 25 participants' data from our Stroop task, and you calculated T, and you did that on one sheet. This is the first part of your Part 2 assignment for Lab 1. What you're going to be doing today is you're using the same document. You already started on this document. You're going to add a new sheet, and what you should do is copy and paste all of my data from all of this. You're going to copy and paste it into cell A1. So it's very similar to what we did in Lab Friday. What we did in Lab Friday was we compiled the reaction time data doing these if-then statements right here. That should be familiar. You guys did we did a bunch of if-then statements in Excel. Then right here, we calculated the average of the incongruent condition. Right here, we calculated the average of the congruent condition. There were 60 incongruent trials. There's 60 incongruent trials and 20 congruent trials. So one additional thing, though, that's important when you're actually doing your own experiments, which we're going to be, getting to in the near future, is that in a lot of studies, including a lot of studies that use the Stroop task, you don't just care about all the trials. You actually only care about trials in which the answer is correct. And I'm looking at my data right here, and you can see right here in column G, this is the column that tells me for each trial whether I got the answer correct or incorrect. If there's a 1 in column G, that means that I got it correct. If there is a 2 in column G, that means that I got it incorrect. So my incorrect trial is, I only missed 1. So out of all 80 trials, I had 1 incorrect trial. And the way it generally works in research is that, and on like this, the Stroop task, is that we include reaction times only for those trials which are actually correct. So Friday, when we were doing this in lab, I just kind of wanted you to learn the basics of how to compile data with if-then statements. But in an actual practice, when you're compiling them, you only want to include those trials which include a correct answer. So for that, you just have two more columns of if-then statements. And then those are the if-then statements, which basically say, only put the reaction time here if the number in column G for that trial is 1. If the number for that trial is 2, that is, if I got it wrong, then you're just going to put false there. I'm not going to include that reaction time. So I'll show you up here where I started how you do this, show you the exact formulas. So I've already written the formula. When you already written the formula and then you click on the cell, the formula appears up here. And so I said if G33 equals 1, and you can see right there, that's G33, and it's squared blue right now. If that equals 1, then I want Excel to copy and paste the contents of right here. This is the reaction time for that trial. So if the answer is right, copy and paste the reaction time. If this answer is wrong, then you'll put false there. It'll put false there. It will not put the reaction time. As you can see, I got this one correct. And so Excel correctly put the reaction time, 564 there. Same thing over here in column L. If G33 equals 1, if G33 equals 1, then I'm going to copy and paste, Excel is going to copy and paste the contents of J33, which is right here. So this equals 1, and it already said false. Oops. It says false right here. And so if this is correct, it's going to say false, because that's what false already says here. But also, if I got the answer incorrect, it would also say false. So no matter what I do for this if-then statement, it should say false here. So then you'll use, once you write in these if-then statements, you do the copy and paste trick or the drag down trick like that. And for this one, you're going to be doing it on this exact set of data, so you know what the right answers are supposed to be. The only trial that I missed, the only trial that I have a number 2 is right here. Right here, this one where is green and black. So I guess the ink was green and the word spelled out black. And you can see right here, these are both falses. If I would have gotten this correct, then the number 606 would appear right here, because this is an incongruent trial. And if this would have been a 1, then it would say the number 606 here, but it says 2. I got it wrong. So if G108 equals 1, then copy and paste the contents of I108, which is right there, but it says 2. And so the conditional is not met. This does not equal 1. Therefore, Excel copies and pastes the word false instead of the reaction time. And so then I recalculated the average reaction times right here. Please note that they're different now. Right here, these are correct reaction times. These are the reaction times that only for correct trials. And what I've done here is I've just used count once again. Remember what count does is counts the amount of cells in that column that have a number in it. And you notice now that this column says 59. The reason it says 59 now instead of 60 is because I missed exactly one trial in the incongruent condition. That one trial was right here. And so now, instead of a number being there, it now says false. And so when I count the total amount of numbers in column K, there's only 59 numbers there when originally there were 60. There were 60 total incongruent trials, but I only got 59 of them correct. I got all 20 of the congruent trials correct. So this is what you're going to be doing, once again, using the same Excel document that you used last time. So last time for Lab 1, Part 2, you started with calculating T in Excel using formulas. Add a sheet, and then you're going to copy and paste my data, which I provide you in an Excel file on Blackboard. Copy and paste it into cell A1. It should come, all the data should appear here. And then you're going to be doing these exact calculations, the same ones that you did Friday, and then the calculation that I showed you just now. So that is this first part. And then once you do that, you're done. You can turn it in. It's due Friday night. Any questions or comments about that before I tell you about the next in-class activity that we have for today? Okay. So spatial EF1, that was the article that we read for today. I only have one discussion question for you. And and you can see, let's see, on Blackboard, discussion activities. Here it is, spatial EF1 discussion question, and the question is written right there. And you can see, I'm not going to spend the time to read it. You can see it right there. I want you to answer it on a Microsoft Word document. Once again, you can work in groups if you want. And turn it in a Microsoft Word document. That one is due Thursday night. And then finally, there is the Lab 2 prep. So for Lab 2 prep right here, there's a link for this. And the link takes you to some videos that the creator of Psyc Toolkit, that professor, he's a pretty big deal, pretty smart person, created videos to help teach Psyc Toolkit. It's actually how I taught myself how to use Psyc Toolkit, so they're pretty darn good. And I'm not gonna have you watch all of them. There's like 10 steps. I only want you to watch the steps 3 through 5. So some of the steps, if I recall, have multiple short videos. Basically, by my count, there's 27 minutes of videos that I want you to watch. And then I just want you to answer 3 questions about those videos. And basically the goal of these questions is just to prove to me and to the grader that you actually watched the videos and were paying attention to them while you were watching them. So those 3 questions, let's see, this will be in the labs portion. So let's go back to labs. So Lab 2 prep right here. I've once again included the link to the videos, the Psyc Toolkit demo videos. And then the 3 questions that I want you to answer. So once again, on a Microsoft Word document, you're going to answer these 3 questions. You can do it in a group. You can do it by yourself if you want, but then you're going to turn them in here. So you have 3 things that you're going to basically, you've already started Lab 1, Part 2, but that's going to be due Friday. And then we're starting basically 2 more in-class activities today. And those will be, both of those are due Thursday. Lab 2 prep is due Thursday night at 11:59. I don't think it's going to take that long. I think it's basically, I think if you wanted to, you could finish it before today's class lets out. And then this one is off, the finishing Lab 1 Part 2. That is due, yeah, that one's due Friday. So let me just go back to this. The due dates are all here and they're all correct. So Lab 1 Part 2 is due Friday, and the other 2 assignments are both Thursday night. So are there any questions about these assignments? I think these should be pretty short. I think you could actually finish these all during today's class time. So I just want to brief, if no one has questions, I'm going to briefly lecture on APA formatting. And the reason I'm doing this is because you do have Group Project 1 coming up, and part of Group Project 1 requires you to write an APA formatted research paper over the project that we do. And so I want to make sure that you are up to speed on APA style. I've included in the slides a very nice example of an APA formatted paper. It's not an actual paper, but it's formatted like one. And instead of like actual talking about a scientific idea, they're kind of talking about the paper itself is kind of talking about the formatting, but it's correctly formatted. So let's go back to so the things we're going to talk about briefly today: the title page, abstract, introduction, method section, results section, discussion, references. You're going to be doing all of these for your APA style paper. And so we'll start talking about the title page, which includes these things: title, author's name, author affiliation. The author affiliation is basically University of Kansas. That you guys will be the author, so that's and everyone here is University of Kansas. A running head, I'll show you that here in a second, and an author note, I'll show you that. So let's go back to the document here. So talking about the title page, this thing right here is the running head. It's basically a header. You do not have to use the word running head if you don't want to. That's optional. The word running head is optional, but you do need to have a running head. And basically what the running head is, it is an abbreviated version of the title of your paper. The title of this paper you see right here is Sample APA Paper for Students Interested in Learning APA Style 6th edition. And you notice how the running head is just an abbreviated version, Sample for Students. It's an abbreviated version of this longer title. That's the running head. In the upper left-hand corner, it's a header in the upper left-hand corner, and then the number occurs in the upper right-hand corner. There's your name. There's your university affiliation. This person was from Illinois State, will be from the University of Kansas. And then here's your author note down here. All you really need for your author note is like something like, you don't need your address, just like your name, and then say Department of Psychology, University of Kansas. And then you can say corresponding concerning this paper should be addressed to a person's name in your group, and then that email address for that person. Usually for an article that's submitted to a journal, even if there's 4 authors, there's only one corresponding author. The corresponding author is the person who interacts with the journal editor. And so the reason there's this author notice, it's basically informing the journal, this is the person who's going to be communicating with the editor. In the case of this paper, I'll actually be communicating with all of you guys, but I still want you to have the author note just for practice. So that's the title page. Any questions about the title page? Okay, the abstract. You probably know by now, the abstract is a brief summary of the content of a paper, and includes all of these things. A very brief statement about what is the purpose of the investigation. It should be clear who your participants are. Are they adults? Are they elderly individuals? Are they kids? Are they babies? Are they individuals with some type of psychiatric disorder? Briefly state the research procedures. You will briefly state what the findings of your study were, the most important findings, and then the implications of your study in the abstract. And when I'm grading these, I will be looking that all of these components do appear in the abstract that your group eventually turns in. The abstract appears on page 2 page 1 is the title page. Page 2 should be the abstract. And it says the word abstract at the top of it. These little details, like saying the word abstract at the top, these are important, and they're a common way, especially on the first group project when people are getting used to the APA formatting. A common way for people to get kind of silly points taken off is they just forget to do things like write the word abstract right here. A very easy thing to do, but there's a lot of formatting that you have to remember in APA style. So please remember, in the top of the abstract, you do have the word abstract, and then you write the actual abstract. And then, it should be a paragraph like this. Conciseness is usually appreciated. Usually long abstracts are considered, sometimes you have to write a long abstract, but generally simple is better. And then after that's done, the actual paper starts. The actual introduction starts on page 3. And the introduction is arguably the most difficult section to write. At least for me, that's always been the case. And I've heard other people say that as well, because it's usually kind of where you're getting all the ideas, you're kind of juggling the ideas together. And eventually they all come together. But usually while you're writing the introduction, this is when like ideas that were kind of murky are becoming clearer and clearer gradually. And that process of things that are kind of foggy and you don't really understand, and then eventually they get clear, that occurs while you're writing the introduction, which is why, at least personally, I think introductions are challenging. So the beginning of the introduction describes the problem that you're investigating. The very first paragraph or paragraphs in particular describe the rationale, which means just the reason why the study is important, and will define any key terms. And what I mean by rationale would be things like if you're doing a study on schizophrenia, part of the rationale for doing a study on schizophrenia is that it is a disorder that influences thousands of people in the United States and costs our society like millions of dollars every year, trying to treat these individuals. So it's a problem that affects people's lives, and it also is a costly issue that people have. And so usually the first paragraph, you're kind of justifying, why do we even care about this problem at all? We want to understand schizophrenia, the disorder, because the better we understand it, maybe the better we can treat it, and the less people will have to suffer because of this, and the less money, less it will cost our society. I mean, in these first paragraphs, the first paragraph or two are usually where you're kind of just giving a big picture, like this is why the rationale. But usually in these first paragraphs, you're also defining key terms. And one of the in-class discussion activities that we have today involves you kind of analyzing the introduction of the spatial EF, that one question for the spatial EF article, the one question that I ask you, it concerns the introduction. In particular, it concerns the very first 3 paragraphs of that article. And basically the question that I ask you regarding spatial EF1 is, what is the rationale of this article in your own words? And please, while you're reading these 3 paragraphs, I do want you to notice that the authors are careful to make sure that the key terms that are relevant to their paper, that they do define them early on in the paper. You don't want to introduce a term early on, not define it, and have the reader looking through your whole paper not knowing what this term means. So really important terms are defined early, usually in the same paragraph or paragraphs that you're describing the rationale. Let's see. Then the introduction, after these first couple paragraphs, the first paragraph or 2, then you get into a detailed review of the literature, which is when you flesh out the exact question that you're asking and like its basis in the literature. I'm going to help you with this kind of a lot for group project 1. I'm basically going to tell you the reason why I'm going to tell you the literature to use to some extent. You'll just have to find a little bit. So I'm going to really give a lot of guidance for this for group project 1. Group project 2, you're going to be mostly on your own, though I'll be willing to counsel you, of course. So at the end of the introduction, after the literature review, it states that you'll state the hypothesis towards the end of the introduction. Kind of when you're doing the literature review, you're working up to a hypothesis. You're working up to, this is what we think is going to happen in this study, or at least these are like the potential outcomes that we would expect given the literature that we've reviewed previously. So far, I'm going to review, there's basically like 3 main parts of the intro. The very beginning, when you're describing the rationale and defining key terms. Then there's the detailed literature review, which is when you're going into the details of the previous research, and that's kind of motivating the specific question that you're asking. And then towards the end, you kind of summarize the hypothesis which has emerged from the detailed literature review that you previously wrote about. An important aspect of this is kind of formulating the logic that leads to your hypothesis. Once again, for group project 1, I've come up with the hypothesis for us. Basically, all you have to do is kind of put into your own words the hypothesis that I provide for you, and you'll have to describe the literature that I have encouraged you to use for group project 1. So for the introduction, when you're writing for group project 1, I'm going to give you a lot of structure. You're just going to have to kind of do the writing in your own words. Towards the end of the introduction, there's often a summary of the procedure which is used in the experiments, though this is kind of optional. Though good studies usually will do this. It's basically a very brief version of the procedure of the study. I'm not going to say too much about the remaining sections for today. I'm going to try and go through these remaining ones quickly. Method, participants, who they are, they're going to be randomly selected for us from the SONA system subject pool. I don't think we're going to have apparatus or materials in our method section for group project 1 at least. Apparatus and materials section is used when you have like a new technology that you want to describe for people. And we're not really using a new, Psy Toolkit is actually a relatively new technology, but I don't think it's like different enough from previous studies that we necessarily need to describe it in its own section. Really, the materials are just like a computer and software in a computer, which is not new enough that we need it. So in your group project 1, you're gonna have a participants section, a subsection of the method, and then the procedure subsection of the method. The procedure is where the bulk of stuff is gonna be in your method section. The participant section is gonna be really short. It might literally be 1 sentence for group project 1. The procedure will definitely be longer. This is where we describe everything that we're gonna do in project 1 in enough detail that someone else could replicate exactly what we did if they wanted to. So for the results section, you want to have your most important results first, then secondary results. A great example that we've already seen for this is Mozart 1, the very first article that we read. Their results, for what it's published in Nature, and so they don't actually divide up the article into different sections because they try and keep things as brief as possible in the journal Nature. But you can still see in that article that they report the very first, the most important result first. So for them, that was in Mozart 1, that was the one-way repeated measures ANOVA, which was significant. And then after that, they do the post hoc t-tests that make the pairwise comparisons. So you do the most important statistical results first, and then more secondary analyses such as post hoc tests will come after that. You do want to report anything. So if you do a factorial ANOVA, that means you're going to have at least 3 statistical results that you're going to have to report, and you report all of them, all the statistics that you performed. You include those statistics in the results section, even if they don't support your hypothesis. And I'll mention, it's okay when results don't support your hypothesis. Both of my empirical papers that I published in the last few years, the hypothesis that I thought was going to happen actually was not exactly what I thought was going to happen, but I still got the papers published. And that's okay. A lot of papers, the initial hypothesis is not supported, but you still learn something very interesting from the research, even if the initial hypothesis is not supported. These are the things that you want to report. The t-statistic, degrees of freedom, p-values, those are the most crucial ones. And then effect sizes, which we haven't really talked about effect size that much in this class, and you probably only talked about it a little bit in stats and methods. I will show you later on in the semester how to calculate effect sizes in SPSS and report them in APA style. For our study, you will most likely be comparing means with like a t-test. Well, for our study in particular, I already know for group project 1, you will be doing a 2-way ANOVA. And that for our design, there'll be 4 means. And the best way for us to show those means will be a graph that shows the means of those 4 conditions with a measure of variability. And what I mean on a graph, the measure of variability is known as an error bar. I will also teach you in a future lab how to make error bars in Microsoft Excel. I'll teach you how to make graphs and error bars in Microsoft Excel. So you will be reporting for group project 1, means on a graph, and your measure of variability will be error bars that appear on that graph. However, it is possible, if you want, that you could also make a table, which is basically just lists the means as numbers. And then you would write, like in parentheses, the standard deviation within that condition, or the standard error within that condition. So there's kind of 2 ways. You can make a graph or you can make a table. For our group project 1, It probably would be inappropriate to report the means in the results section itself because we have 4 of them, which is kind of a lot. Usually when you have more than 2 means, you report the means in a graph, that is a figure, or a table. If you only have 2 conditions, then you don't actually need to make a graph or table. You can just say in the results section, the mean of condition 1 was 10, the mean of condition 2 was 12, the standard deviation of condition 1 was X, the standard deviation of condition 2 was Y. But we're not going to be writing in those means in the results section. We'll be making a graph or table. And it's also important, this is something I'll be grading, you will be making a figure for group project 1. And there needs to, it's somewhere in your results section, you need to make a reference. You need to say, see figure 1. There needs to be somewhere, and this is APA style, in your results section, if you've made a graph, where you have to reference the figure that you made that you're describing in the results section. So something like, the results that we're analyzing here are shown in figure 1. And then you say, the factorial ANOVA revealed a significant main effect of A and B and a significant A by B interaction. But you always have to state somewhere in the results section, you actually have to say, figure 1, see it. Take a look. I think this is enough. We'll talk about discussion sections later. We're kind of a long way, because we haven't even collected data. We're kind of a long way from doing anything like this. So we'll come back to this later. So I think that's it for lecture stuff for today. Yeah, that's good. We'll do the rest of this stuff later. So we have discussions, citations, and references that we'll do later. And how to find articles. We'll do all this stuff later. This is definitely enough to get us kind of thinking in terms of APA style. And we'll review it later. So now I'll stop recording. You should go ahead and start your in-class assignments. I'll be here for the next hour. If you have questions, I can do breakout rooms for the people that want to stick around and don't have groups. If you already have a group, then form your own Zoom meetings. And if you need to consult me, then simply come back to this Zoom meeting where I'll still be here until 3:45. For individuals that don't have people that they know they want to work with, then I'll just randomly assign you to breakout rooms as soon as I stop recording. And then individuals who are asynchronous probably are going to be working alone, unless you know of other individuals who are also working asynchronously. So I'm going to stop recording now.